Was there collaboration? I do not know at this time, but we must find that out. We've seen a pattern of making it more difficult for us to find that information, and I say this to all of you, and I, in 10 years of the integrity of myself as a 24-year veteran of the United States Army, know that your word is your bond, and how you act on this. I am deeply concerned that if we as a nation do not look at this, it was former Vice President Cheney that said, if the Russians did what it appears like they did, it is a deliberate act of war. If you can destroy the integrity of a democratic government without ever firing a missile, that is the most effective war you have ever seen fought. And I think for us, regardless of who you voted for, regardless if you're a supporter of President Trump, you're libertarian, you're green, or you're a Democrat, we must find the answer. So we've been asking for it since then. I would ask you, and this question came up at my town hall in Austin last night, what can we as citizens do? You can continue to raise your voice and demand this. You can make it clear that we do not have an attention span like the president does. It is much longer than that. Our attention span is much longer. Our commitment to this nation transcends political ideology. And the facts point to this, that we must know the extent of what they did to protect us for when they do it again, because they have been emboldened by this. So the answer is yes across the board. And I would ask all of you to please continue to focus. And I know there are so many issues, and this administration tries to flood the zone so that there's so many shiny objects, it's hard to follow. Don't allow this one to get distracted because it's too critical. Angie, you got the next call.
I would just add to that. This has been one of my greatest disappointments of Jason Lewis since he took that oath. He campaigned to be an independent voice for Minnesota. He's been anything but independent so far. He needs to put country above party and ask for an independent investigation.
From 11:30 to 1, and everybody's welcome to bring a sign asking Jason Lewis to please ask for a special prosecutor.
Well, I would just start out by saying you're absolutely right. The scope of this investigation has got to be with full transparency to the American people. It must be independent. I spent the first several years of my life, my career, as a journalist. So I have a tremendous respect for the profession of journalism. In fact, I gave quite a few politicians a really hard time as a journalist, and now Secretary of State in Tennessee gives me a hard time about trying to become one. So I think it's critically important that we have this independent investigation that cannot be impugned. It's got to be outside of the scope of the Trump administration.
There's three mechanisms we can use. We can do a select committee. Speaker Ryan could appoint a select committee. The reason we know this works is because we had a select committee on Benghazi that took up an entire floor across from my office I had to see every day when I got up. We had a select committee on Planned Parenthood based on videos of the person who took the video was charged with felonies and is in prison now, but that select committee was empowered. And we spent money on that, and in fact, on the Benghazi committee, they had more members of the committee and more investigators on that than we have on the BA committee. So just to tell you where that's at. The second mechanism is the independent counsel. To pay for the independent counsel, it has to come through Congress as a regular bill, and we have got to vote on it and vote for the appropriations. So that the special prosecutor then goes back to where they can appoint that and use the resources necessary. And I agree with you on this. And again, be very honest with all of us. In this room, you get it, that we want to find out exactly what happened. I'm not jumping to the conclusion that there was collusion with either the Trump campaign or the Trump administration, but I always think that the best thing on this is, and in Congress, my thing has been about transparency and openness, is sunlight is the best disinfectant. Let's find out what was there. And again, for those who make the accusation that we're just sore losers in this has nothing to do with that whatsoever. I said, I don't see any facts that Russians changed voting tallies, but there's no doubt that they tried to change the opinion of people in this country. We need to find out what that is, and I would encourage the president, if he wants to and what we need him to do, get this put behind us so that we can move on with the important things of truly improving healthcare, of getting a transportation bill that works, of starting to move on those issues we care about. So I'm with you on that. Again, I would encourage all of you. I think they think there's going to be a weariness of system. We're going to let it go. But I would argue that we can multitask. All of us can. We have to prioritize issues. This issue of an assault on our democracy by a foreign government and a hostile foreign government is fundamentally at the heart of the democracy. We have to have an answer. So, sir.
And I thought Angie might have asked Don Rickles to come because I thought he looked like Don Rickles.
That is beautiful. I thought you told.
I don't want you to get me in trouble,
It
Matthew.
was a Tom Cruise look.
It looks just like Tom Cruise, right, Gwen?
I should channel some Don Rickles. So, yeah, thank you. Go.
No, my question is, it's not really a question. I've been hearing about this for a long time, and now Trump, today or yesterday, formed a panel for voter fraud, what he says is voter fraud. The vice president and also Chris Colbeck are going to lead that. And I think it's going to be very detrimental to Democrats. I mean, I don't think that we can win if they throw millions of people out the voting roll. And I'm not sure if you've heard of the Interstate Project, like Chris Colbeck was the person that
Yes.
formed it.
I'm very familiar with him from his work in Kansas. So,
I think it's imperative
Yeah.
that fight this because it's.
and I would go a step further. I would argue that anyone who believes in a free and open democracy, our Republican colleagues should join us in this, that the president's executive order was focused on the belief that he believed he got 3 million more votes than that were recorded or people voted illegally. The integrity of our election system is absolutely critical. The actual mechanisms of it, we saw it starting in Florida in 2000 with the recount, hanging chads and the Diebold machines and everything else that went there. We also see it in a little more subtle ways where we require voter ID in Alabama and then we close all the DMV stations, especially where there's minority voters, to make it more difficult to get an ID. So what the president brought up was, and I will stand shoulder to shoulder with him, that he called this executive order a protection of our voting system. It appears that with Chris Colbeck, from who is the chief, I would argue, voter suppression expert, that may not be broader. But here's what I would argue to you, and this is all of us. The frustrations, and you're going to express them, and this is another one of those things that are up there that is absolutely critical. I think it's imperative for us to go to our citizens. You're here tonight on a beautiful night because you are super motivated. There's a lot of folks out there that make this thing, and I hope this has been put to rest. Well, both sides are the same. It doesn't matter who you get there. What we need to do is use this as an opportunity to go forward on this. And we should make sure that there's no voter fraud. We all know it's one of the rarest crimes to have somebody do in-person voter fraud. But we should make sure the system is protected from that. But we should use this as an opportunity to ask the question, why is the greatest and oldest democracy on earth have a 54% participation rate in a critically important election? Why is that? Why doesn't every state have same-day registration? Why are we still voting on Tuesday where people have to go to work and ask for time off when we should do it Saturday, or better yet, do it for several days and through the mail that we're able to verify that? Why are we not making, pardon me? National holiday, absolutely. And that's the way to do this. So I think my advice to you of seeing it both as a concerned citizen who one day just said, I've had enough, and my wife says, couldn't you have just written a letter to the editor instead of running for Congress? Nothing in moderation. My advice to you is, we need to turn every one of these assaults on our democracy into an opportunity to expand it and make it more inclusive. So when the president brings up something that appears to be voter suppression, we go on the offense and expand it. When the Attorney General today decides that it's a good idea to turn back sentencing guideline changes and lock up more people for violent drug offenses so that they can then transfer to a private prison system that's entire business model is based on recidivism rates increasing. What we can do on that is jump right into the fray of that and talk about reforming how we do that. Reforming prisons, talk about what they mean for our communities. So yes, sir. Cross-check everything they've done. It is absolutely obvious to me that they are not going to maybe make the full effort, but I think what we can do to our citizens and ask us, I use this quote a lot, that Maya Angelou quote, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. I think most people know who they are. I would argue they may not know who we are yet, and they don't know what we've, so they said, what difference does it make? It's the same. They're both bad. They're all bad or whatever. Let's start taking this one and seize the moment. So I think that is a fundamental opportunity. I love the idea of a national holiday. I love that when you get your driver's license, you're already there. Talk about getting kids. My daughter's 16 and her friends are actively engaged in this. Those young people now want to be engaged. Let's have a conversation about being 17. I joined the Army the day after I turned 17, but I couldn't vote. That doesn't make any sense. So I think there's some discussions there. So.
Yeah, I would just add, all the policy solutions are fantastic, but there's some real things you can do this summer. In the off year, get involved with voter registration efforts. Get out, get door to door, get people registered ourselves. Let's not wait on a big policy change to really improve the situation. And I'll also say that it reminds me of Donald Trump, this topic too. You know, wave the hand, wave the hand, wave the hand, look over here. Look at all those faulty voters who voted for someone else in the last election. So it's a distraction, but it's one that we can go on the offensive over.
Great. Clear in the back, sir.
Yeah, my name is Jeff Halbert, and my wife and I are new to Apple Valley. We lived in Mankato for 15 years, so you can
Welcome
figure out
to the district.
if you can figure out how to redraw the boundaries.
We need Apple Valley in this district. We want Apple Valley.
Actually, my district's getting bigger. So.
My question for either of you is, you know, my wife and I have tried repeatedly to get a hold of Representative Lewis. So what advice and counsel do you have for us as either individuals or collectively to get him here? I mean, we shouldn't have to wait for another year and a half when we can elect you, Angie. What can we do today to get him engaged and represent us?
Has anyone here tried that?
Yeah.
Look, I don't know how you get Jason Lewis to actually represent his district. Personally, I don't think he's capable of doing it. But that's just me. But I think what you do is what you're doing tonight by showing up on a beautiful Friday evening, by working with groups like Indivisible, with Stand Up, with Our Revolution, all of the groups who are putting together town halls. And they're beautiful. They're beautiful. People come to tell their stories. I've tried my best to stay away from them because I was his opponent in 2016, but I just had to go to one of them personally. And to listen to the stories of real policy decisions affecting Minnesotans' lives. They're beautiful. So get involved with those groups. Keep going. Keep calling him. Go to the vigil on Monday. Keep telling him that this is not a party discussion. This is a discussion about Minnesota families, and reminding him that 53% of voters in this congressional district actually voted against him on election day. He needs to listen to his constituents.
What I would say is a mechanism as a member on how you do this, the best things are personalized calls or emails. The things where you do the big cards and everybody does it together, we log those all. We get about 7,000 to 10,000, depending on it peaks on certain issues of contact per week. I list my home number, and people, are respectful of that. I talk to them at the grocery store when they do that, and I usually take my 10-year-old along because if I need a human shield on the phone. They're swearing at me. Wait, my son is here. He gives he's good at it now. He gives the puppy dog eyes.
Hey, Tim, in 2 more years, he isn't going to the grocery store.
There you go. But,
Just saying, I got that.
but I would tell you this connection, and we really value it. I would say it takes about 2 weeks. Our best practice is 6 weeks, and it's about 2 weeks to turn around. There will be if it's a basic question on contact, it'll be somewhat of a form letter, but stating my position or the member of Congress position. If that's not good enough and someone follows up, a staffer will try and take that call. And people who are experienced with this, the staffers know more than I do. So people are like, I didn't get to meet with the member. I'm like, if you want to get something done, meet with the staff expert. They know what's going on. But continue to ask that. And I said what I get disappointed about of this idea of, well, everybody's a paid protester, they come or whatever. Many people come here, we don't know what your politics are. Yeah, that's right. People come and that's exactly right. And we end up doing the bulk of a congressional office is constituent service. And it is absolutely imperative that people have as smooth a way as possible to get in. I will tell you this though, from experience, your calls, and we collate them, and I get a weekly status report. They do matter. And then what I try and do once a week is pick a half dozen of them inside each of those topics and call people. One, it's really awesome because people, I was like, Mary, this is Congressman Walz, I got your letter. And she's like, oh my God, somebody read it. Or so do that. So I would encourage you, like Angie's saying, is it's not about the validation of having people show up and cheer for you, because trust me, we were discussing earlier when we did the town halls in 2010, the Teamsters were kind enough to send their biggest people in black shirts to sit behind my wife and my family because it was not a good environment. You know what though? I needed to be there. I needed to hear it. And these were people that were not there because they were Republican. They were there because they didn't know how healthcare was going to work, and they were really mad at me because it hadn't been being explained to them. So keep the fight on, keep asking. You got the next one.
Hi, I'm Shelley Beaumont, and I live in Apple Valley. I have a question that you can probably answer. I have one for you.
All right. That I probably can't
Ooh,
answer.
you're in for it.
I'll just throw the phone out for you, as Jeremy said, as being part of the minority Congress, with all the activism going on, are you getting any sense that McConnell and Ryan are starting to feel nervous, or are they still sticking with their diabolical plans?
Well, yeah, it doesn't seem very Minnesota nice, does it? Yeah, so I have been watching the state legislature. I'm very disappointed with budget talks. They're talking about a surplus that Republicans want to return to really the richest Minnesotans. And we have an opportunity with good fiscal management in the state of Minnesota to make some calculated investments. And I've said from the beginning that one of the best areas that we can invest in this state is in our people. And that's in education and job training. I mean, I worked for manufacturing companies for 25 years. And the best thing we can do is to make sure that the kids who graduated from Inver Hills Community College last night and who are about to graduate from Dakota County Technical, I work with both of those schools, I gave the commencement speech last night at Inver Hills, that they have the job skills for the actual jobs that exist. And I think we can make investments in pre-K that aren't being made. And then let's talk about infrastructure. That's one area where we could actually work with Republicans on if they were willing to sit down with Democrats and talk about how do we invest in the infrastructure of this nation in rural areas with broadband and access to health care and those sorts of things. But it just feels like Republicans don't want to work with us on anything, and they can't govern themselves, right? I mean, they've got control, they can't govern. Then the last thing I'm going to say has to do with the federal law that passed on internet privacy. And then the state, in a bipartisan manner, came through and protected its citizens, and then now what have they done? They've taken those protections away again. So apparently the apparatus got to those Republicans and said, you can't vote against those companies, they're going to profit from this information. So the answer, frankly, the bills that are coming out of the state and of the Congress right now, I was in DC a few weeks ago and I asked a friend of mine, well, are you going to vote no or are you going to vote hell no? Because there's absolutely no other answer if you're not willing in good faith to come to the negotiating table on behalf of the American people.
That was a good gubernatorial platform too. I think that's it. A couple things I would tell you. Here are two good things. One of my favorite is the day after that passed to be able to sell your personal browser history. The Kickstart campaigns that were raising money to buy the members of Congress browser histories were awesome. I was contributing, so but that's just a start. Net neutrality's on there again, and I would go back. These two are absolutely tied together. The issue at hand here, you saw it happening. It took a little while longer to get here. You saw the dominoes start to fall. Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan. One of the ways to do this is to figure out ways to subdivide populations, and then figure out ways, I would argue, to make it a little more difficult to vote, and then try and figure out ways to use, as a former fourth grade teacher, fear is a wonderful short-term motivator. They do it, but it's not a good lasting change of that. All of those things coupled together, you see it coming home here in Minnesota, and one of the reasons why I'm motivated to do this is that they've now tried to make the case, and they make an argument that somehow a smart, sustainable, long-term transit plan in Minneapolis somehow hurts Highway 14 funding for Claremont. That is ludicrous. This state has always been tied together. Where one goes, so goes the other. And so they've done that, and I would argue federally, they are in a trap that was created by them for electoral wins, where it feels like everything is political, not policy-wise. It's because now and this is my soapbox for you in 20 seconds, the real fundamental, if you want all of these problems you're going to bring up tonight have a better chance of being fixed, do nonpartisan citizen or judicial redistricting and campaign finance reform. That would my colleagues, with very few exceptions, they do not fear general elections, they fear primaries. So the minute, they won't take pictures with me because they're afraid it makes them look too moderate. So they won't even, well, that might be the reason Don Rickles on that. But anyway, so yes, it is real. They are stuck. There's no way out of it. They cannot compromise. They're being driven by a far-right fringe of the Freedom Caucus folks that are distorting where folks are at. And the only alternative to this, and I would argue this is makes things so critically important, if historical trends would have held true, the 2012 election would have put Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House, but because of the gerrymandered districts, we did not get it. 2020 is our next opportunity to do this, to change that, so it's absolutely critical. But keep this in mind, Democrats only control 16 governorships in the nation, and those are the places where the districts are written. So yes, that's where the fundamental problem starts. They have no way out of this trap. John Boehner went because of this. Paul Ryan will go because of it. The next one will go because of it, because it is structurally, the House of Representatives is structurally damaged like it's never been, to the point that we have to reset that. So, you know, and I would say something, I've only worked with it, I had a positive experience in working on a piece of legislation on veteran suicide, but I would tell all of you this, and this is what's a real challenge, and I think we're in this mode, that I understand, and the president aside, because it doesn't work with it, as members of Congress, and in the case of members of Congress in Minnesota's delegation, I am friendly and try and reach out because we have a common goal. And I try not to assume worse motives of people. It's better for my mental health, because if somebody because if somebody's in the grocery store going off on me, to show a little empathy and say, you know what, this must be really important to this person. Something must be going wrong with their lives if they need to do that. I try and do that with my colleagues. Here's what I can tell you. Rank and file members of Congress are a different breed than leadership. Leadership exists for a different reason, and that whole redistricting thing is, the only people who get into leadership are people who in safe districts can all just spend their time raising money and give it to other people who support them. I think with that case is there's very little interaction anymore between rank and file members and leadership on the other side of the aisle, and so it's hard for me to say. I would assume that he would like to see people get health care and people get jobs and people to have safe houses and safe roads, but at some point in time, words are words, actions are what stands for something. So I'll let you decide on where is that. So yes, sir.
Representative Walz, I live in Congressional District 2. You're not my representative, but I want to thank you for coming up and speak to us.
My pleasure.
I had the opportunity to thank you in person for your vote last week against that healthcare bill.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jason Lewis has made a serious mistake. He had on that, and Angie, I hope that you made I know, I think you'll make a fine governor, but I think we're gonna miss your leadership in the House.
Absolutely.
And to Angie, I hope you really are seriously considering rerunning. I agree completely with Keith Ellison last week, who encouraged you to run. Please, with Jason Lewis's current approval ratings, I think you can more than eclipse that 2% barrier.
I want to echo what the gentleman just said, because I actually am really concerned about losing you in Washington. And who's going to replace you? We need you there. And I live in Northfield, Minnesota. My name is Dorothea. Sorry, I didn't say that. But I work in Rochester, and that's in your district. And I'm really sad that we're going to lose you, and I want to know what are we going to do without you?
Yeah, well, you are kind. You know what the difference between that and a eulogy is? One person believes what you said.
A lot of people
At
do.
the eulogy, none of you would. No, I'm grateful for that, but here's what I think is what's changed in the first district. Keep this in mind, I'm the second Democrat in 125 years in the first district. The other one left the party to run Kasich's campaign and John McCain's campaign. So it's me, and there's been 3 of us since statehood. But I'll tell you what's changed is that the activism of the people, that more folks have shown up. There's John Austinson is here tonight, who's a candidate who ran against a state house candidate, ran a great race. I'm somewhat biased to him because he's a high school teacher and a football coach, but I'm just saying he's out here. So what I would tell you is here's what I would say. I too am concerned. This is one of the swing seats. It's the second reddest district that a Democrat has. There are only 9 rural Democrats left in America. So I understand that it's a difficult one, but here's what's different. In 2020, redistricting is coming, and Minnesota is going to lose a seat anyway because of population decline. And if we do not win the governor's seat, they will redraw the districts, and there will be no first district anywhere. There will be no state house seats we can get, and they will redraw the state senate seats. So I feel a real sense of affinity to make sure the whole process is fair, but I'm telling you this, and again, it's 18 months, and none of this matters if people don't get out and work for the change they want to see. I saw polling that the Congressional Generic Poll showed a bigger gap than has ever been recorded before, and people are responding that they believe the House of Representatives has to change to be a check on the presidency. So in response to that, I think it's a good deal.
So, back to healthcare, because I can't resist, and Jason Lewis. Look, this was one of the worst days I've had since Election Day, when Jason Lewis and Eric Paulson and Tom Emmer all cast votes in favor of that terrible, terrible bill. And many of you saw me on the campaign trail. You know my personal story. I grew up without health insurance in my family. We didn't go to the dentist because we couldn't afford to go to the dentist. And no family in this country should ever not be able to take their kid to the doctor. It just should not happen in the most prosperous nation on earth. So that was a tough day for me, because I know my vote would have been exactly the opposite for Jason Lewis, and I know he's been going around talking about the problems with healthcare, and there are. We have to acknowledge that there are a number of folks with healthcare plans right now that are unaffordable and that have too high deductibles, and we need to focus on the problem and fix that. We don't need to kick Medicaid recipients off. We don't need to kick 24 million people off of their healthcare, and we don't need to do anything until we actually know what the hell we're doing. So let's see the Congressional Budget Office score. Let's find out what we're voting on in this Congress. So that was the day that I woke up and said, let's go again. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go do some town halls. Let's go.
Okay, my name is Gail Hoffman, and I've been living in Apple Valley for 19 years. One of the biggest blessings is my state senator is Greg Clausen. One of the blessings are because I have a 21-year-old who has Williams syndrome. and he has cognitive speech delays, fine motor and gross motor delays. We have, the state of Minnesota and the federal government has spent thousands of dollars, and our insurance company, we have insurance, making sure that my son has the best quality of life that he can have. We have, with the support of 196, District 196, we have fought to make sure that Eric is included in everything he has done. He was homecoming king of Rosemont High School. But my concern, especially, I'm concerned that we have a president and we have a congressman who doesn't understand the sacrifices that families make to make sure that children like Eric and adults like Eric have a good quality of life. If we lose Medicaid, I don't know how my husband and I will be able to make it financially. And I also don't know what the quality of life will be for Eric, because he's got a pretty good life, but I can't, just so that he can function on a day-to-day basis, his medicines, just his medicines, cost the state of Minnesota and the federal government $15,000 a year at least. And that's not all the surgeries and all the medical treatments that he's had. So I don't want to say, woe is me. What I want to know is, will we be in danger of losing Medicaid, and how do we stop it?
Well, first of all, Eric, come here. The power of the public square is this, that we all understand this, and the president figured out too, finally, that healthcare is a complicated issue. But you know what? Many times it's not so complicated. Two basic principles. First of all, healthcare is a right and not a privilege. And a semi-quasi-philosophical approach in a Pioneer Press story is not what we're talking about. We're talking about Eric. We're talking about people. And so you can convince yourself all you want of what's on paper, but when people are telling you what's happening to them, that's what the real point is. And we as a society, other societies have been able to figure this out, can figure out a way to say it's a right, a human right to get health care. We should have access that is as efficient as possible, and costs should be at a point where providers are still reimbursed at a fair amount, but it does not destroy the economy. We can all agree upon that, and what we all know, and Angie is an expert and will tell you this, is those who tell us that we should just do it like the free market, healthcare is not a market. We don't know what the costs are in many cases. And in any other transaction, the buyer and the seller are on pretty equal grounds. And if I go in and negotiate with Apple Valley Ford for a car, I probably looked up what that Consumer Report says. I know what the cost is. And if I don't like what they told me, I can go down the street and get another one. And then at the end of the day, if I don't like either one of those, I can go home. Eric can't go home without medicine. He can't negotiate the price. He can't go find out where it's at somewhere else. And no one makes enough money to pay for that on their own. So it's not a woe is me. It's but by the grace of God goes each and every one of us and our children. So we're in it.
You to Rosemount next year, so District 196, go, right? Look, like I said before, this is such a personal issue. We cannot stop. I will not stop fighting until every American has health care. Not health insurance, but health care. And that's what we've got to remember. Not one piece of this health care discussion has been about health care, and that's what's so infuriating to me. It's been about how much something costs. It's been about how much we're willing to pay to have a society that has the right to go to the doctor. It's infuriating. So as we think about this moving forward, don't let them get away with talking about health insurance. You want to know about health care. What I want to know is why Medicare cannot negotiate its pricing for seniors. That's what I want to know. What I want to know is give me a policy, come up with a policy that we can discuss that makes sure every citizen in this country has health care they can afford. That's the key. You should not have to be rich in this great nation to be able to take your kid to the doctor. It should never, ever happen.
We get to give a strange answer.
Awesome.
I don't believe that members of Congress are all powerful people either. I'm not a hater,
Yeah.
and I don't want to be one. But I don't understand what they think this is going to do. I mean, do they just like everybody more likely to rich people, and no one's going to notice? I mean, I don't believe it. It doesn't look like that to me, that it's not caring about real people. And so, can you explain?
Yeah, no, it's not a strange question, because I'm telling you, and I was teaching high school at Mankato West, came back after deployment with my National Guard unit, watched what was happening in Iraq, decided President Bush was going to speak in Mankato, was going to take a couple of my high school students. They asked me to take them, their parents did, so they wouldn't get in trouble. I took them out there. One of them, they asked for their ID, they pulled out a wallet, they had a John Kerry sticker on there. The person working the event said, "You're going to have to get back on the bus, you've been deemed a threat to the president." And I said, "It's fine, that would be, it's good. Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Tim Walz," thinking that I was somehow special, because I was like, I actually was a citizen who lived there or whatever, but a teacher and stuff. And long story short, they didn't deem that I was a threat to the president too. And my wife, when they came back, thought I was arrested. And by that point, when they're starting to get ready to do that, I'm like, oh, dang. So I said, well, first of all, I told them, I said, I just returned from a deployment. I'm a sergeant major in the Army. They didn't care about that. I told them I was a football coach in Mankato. They didn't care about that. I told them I was teacher of the year. They really didn't care about that. And then at that point in time, this happening in front of my friends and my neighbors in Mankato, at that point in time, I was a little ashamed, because it felt like maybe for the first time in my life, I found out what it's like to get looked through. That didn't matter to them. I told them that they could find out what was going to be on the front page of the paper in Mankato, President Bush speaking, or local teacher, football coach, sergeant major arrested. So they said they would escort me in if I behaved myself. Wouldn't thought I was arrested. I wasn't. Long story short, I ended up getting elected to Congress. And when I went to the White House, President Bush said, "It might have been easier for us to let you in." But my point on your story is it is the weirdest damn thing. I'm teaching school about this. I taught government a little bit. I'm ashamed. I should give a refund, because it's not like I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. It's totally not like that. But what it is you get there and you look around and you say, oh my God, Kennedy was here, Lincoln was here, Ford, all these people that were here. And you're like, oh my God, what am I doing here? And then you meet your colleagues and say, what the hell are they doing here? And that's a story that's there, but I'm telling you, I do something every Thursday morning. I do a bipartisan run with my colleagues. We agree not to talk about politics. My Georgia friend wants to talk about the war of northern aggression, and we're not going there. But here's my answer to you on what happens here. That there's several things that have happened. My wife would probably attest to this. One is we no longer live around each other, and our kids don't go to school together. So we don't get to know each other in any meaningful manner anymore. That is real. And what I found is, and I think this is a problem for our country, people tend to gravitate both economically, socially, and almost racially to whether it's suburbs or whether it's areas where everyone around them is validating their point of view on things. And what I found is many of my colleagues, it is not House of Cards, it's Forrest Gump. Stuff just happens and they're ignorant to it in many cases. And I use ignorant not as a pejorative. They just don't know in some cases what a family's going through. And so I would tell you this, I find this to be a collection of some of the most eclectic, some of the most inspiring people, some of the quirkiest people you would be around. And if we could figure out with the campaign finance reform and the gerrymandered redistricting, it would look just like America, which would have its quirks, its weird idiosyncrasies, its whatever, but it is now a place, and when you look at the House of Representatives, there's little doubt which side of the House looks more like America in terms of that. Every time I'm trying to find one of my colleagues on the other side, it's really hard because they all look like me, Don Rickles or whatever. So what happens is, it's not malice, it's not bad intent, it's not cruelty, it's simply, I do not have the life experience, and the Congress is no longer reflective of what people in America look like. So there's no one in Congress who's a mechanic. There's a couple of us who are union members. When I went to Congress, I was the only person in Congress who was a high school teacher who taught under No Child Left Behind. So when I asked to be on the Education Committee, they said, oh, hell no, we don't want that. I'm the only one who worked under it. I wanted to be there. And the idea is that how could you do an education bill without a teacher being there? You'd think you'd have to have that. So if I could get a coin to you, these are not bad people with bad hearts that want things to fail. They just have a world view. Whenever I meet them, I'm always amazed. Everybody wants to have the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington story. But it's easier when your dad was a federal judge or a congressman or something, and many of them, that's what happens. And it's not living the life that you live, and they don't understand what it means. So if that makes sense to you, it makes me more, I like these people in many cases, until they vote. So much.
As I was running last cycle, I came up with the idea that we should make a Democrat room, like my kids have gone off to college in dorms. We should make one Democrat and one Republican room together. And so that way they actually have to get to know each other. They kicked me out of the office that I suggested that in. So I don't really think that's an option, but you know, if we only got to know each other, that's the biggest thing. If you talk to folks who've been in DC for a long time, they used to know each other's kids. They used to have dinner together. The demands to come back to the district every single weekend weren't there. And it's important that representatives come back to the district. It'd be great if they met with constituents while they were here. but it's important. Yes, ma'am.
There than that gentleman in the half. Yeah.
Okay.
People are standing up. You people deserve a hand.
Standing room only. With 48 hours notice, standing room only.
So Congressman Walz, I have a comment and then a question. I find it really ironic that Jason Lewis had all kinds of wisdom to spew out through the radio waves, but he won't face people face to face to have a decent discussion with them. I think that shows a lot of cowardice. And secondly, I am asking that you author a bill in the halls of Congress that would require people who run for Congress and the House of Representatives reside in the district.
I was in Congress before I knew that you didn't have to live in the district. I just assumed you had to.
So did we.
I think it's probably a pretty good idea. It's interesting, I was mentioning something earlier, that the Constitution has a couple of lines that says the requirements to be a member of Congress, but nowhere is there a job description. I always assumed that the title representative is what you were supposed to do, but each office is like an independent business, and you can